Members are here, and before we go to minutes, I'm going to let folks know I'm going to move the discussion of the local option levy up to the first item on new business tonight. So we're going to move that because I know a lot of people are here and interested in that, and they're probably more interested in that than sitting through some of the more mundane kinds of, sorry, Gerald, some of the more mundane kinds of things that council has to do. Council members, you have the minutes of the 23rd of July in your council packet, and do they meet with your approval?
Move to approve as written. Second.
Have a motion to second by Schwartzer. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. We're going to now go to visitor comment. There are a number of people here to speak this evening. Let me tell you that while you are allowed 5 minutes, you don't have to take 5 minutes. Remember, this is a one-way communication. We're here listening to you. We're not going back and forth or anything like that. So that's just how it is. We're here to listen to the things that you want to tell us. And I'm going to start here, and we're going to just jump right in. Jim Humphreys from Monmouth. Good evening, Mr. Humphreys. Welcome to Independence.
Good evening. Mayor, members of the Independence City Council, city staff, and members of the public, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening about the proposed Arts and Culture Levy. I'm Jim Humphreys, president of the Heritage Museum Society, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that supports the Independence Heritage Museum. We are led by a dedicated volunteer board of 10 members. We are also a partner organization of the Monmouth Independence Community Foundation and recognized by the Oregon Cultural Trust. We advocate for the levy option that includes funding for the museum, the parks, and the library. The Heritage Museum Society, alongside the museum, has significantly contributed to the community's cultural and historical fabric. Since the museum's grand reopening on April 30th, 2022, it has welcomed over 12,000 visitors and hosted multiple school groups from 7 different school districts. Additionally, our volunteers have contributed over 3,200 hours of volunteer time in 2023, which is the equivalent of about 1.5 full-time employees, and we're on a similar pace for 2024. The museum has also played a key role in community events like the Hop and Heritage Festival, the Ghost Walk, and the Santa Train, and it's been working closely with local American Legion in support of their application to host the Wall that Heals traveling exhibit in 2025. And the museum director's election as president of the Independence Downtown Association highlights her exceptional leadership and recognition of that. The museum has helped to support Independence's downtown economic recovery, attracting visitors who also shop and dine locally. The museum's inclusion in the Oregon, Idaho AAA Regional Travel Magazine as one of 5 museums to visit in the area underscores that impact. School visits often lead to return trips with families, helping to boost local commerce. Moreover, the museum serves as a vital repository of community history, including multi-generational family histories and artifacts, and sensitive topics, such as the Japanese internment during World War II. It offers rotating exhibits from the collection that the museum holds, as well as traveling exhibits from organizations such as the Oregon Historical Society, the National Library of Medicine, and the Smithsonian. The Heritage Museum Society role is primarily to provide supplemental funding and volunteer support for the museum. We have been active in fundraising, including running a hot dog stand at the River's Edge concert series recently, hosting a showing of a silent film last fall, creating a museum store, and launching an annual donor campaign. For context, we funded equipment for a new resource room at the museum, which has been highly successful. But I have to say, it's a bit unreasonable if anyone expects the museum to be able to cover all of the society to cover all of the museum's funding needs. Lastly, I'd like to say that the museum has shown impressive success in the past 2 years. The investment of $200,000 from the city has been a valuable contribution given the museum's achievements and community impacts. Thank you again for consideration of my perspective on the levy, and I again urge you to support the option that includes all 3 of the institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Next speaker will be Billy Woodson from here in Independence.
Good evening. My name is Billy Woodson. I'm a resident of Independence and currently the commander of the American Legion Post 33 here in Independence. And I wanted to speak to the relationship that we have with the museum, the library, as well as the parks department here in the city. When we moved here, my wife and I, approximately 8 years ago, I did not know there was a museum here. Amy Christensen had done an ad, I'm giving her credit for that, to request memorabilia from veterans in the community. I was reluctant to contribute anything, but my wife sort of encouraged me to do so. I donated a painting that was done for me called Reflections. And Reflections, if you're not familiar with it, it's a picture of the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington with images of soldiers holding their hand on inside of the wall with a civilian on the outside touching their hands. That particular painting, Reflections, done by a friend of mine, was taken by the museum and put on an exhibit in a newly formed exhibit called the Veterans Corner. I wasn't so much proud of that, but I was happy that painting was being shown to the public, which at that time in the old museum was not having a lot of visitors. So that Veterans Corner is now, after the move, expanded, and I'm very happy for the veterans to be remembered and thought of in that way and presented in our museum. Also, the museum at that time, I had contacted a post, American Legion Post in Bantam, Connecticut, about a program called Veteran of the Month, which we now have here in Independence. The museum and the city, with the city's approval, allowed us to fly a flag for deceased veterans and their families at the old museum location. Once the museum moved, we now conduct that down at C Street and Main Street at the Veterans Plaza, where the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is located. And the Vietnam Veterans Memorial stood for 40 years in our city with no signage to say what it was about. So with the help of the museum, we created a kiosk, and Natasha and Amy created the signage to go denoting the history of our memorial here in town. To me, as a Vietnam veteran, that was very important and very supportive of the museum to give that recognition to that memorial that just stood down there that people didn't know what it was. So that said, I've also presented the idea of bringing a 3/4 scale replica of the Vietnam Memorial to our city, currently waiting for approval of our application for the 2025 tour. And I had sort of let that go. I had presented the idea, but didn't get a lot of response. And as the mayor had told me one time, I didn't have to be a cheerleader. So Natasha stepped up after a few months had gone by and suggested a meeting. So we had a meeting that received really good support and good enthusiasm. And we're currently, as I said, awaiting the word to bring that traveling wall here to our city, which I think would be a great benefit to our city and our community. The educational that the museum brings to children, it's important to preserve our history and to display our history. And our museum has done an outstanding job. I'm sure, as you all know, you don't need me to tell you that. They've done a wonderful job of presenting various exhibits, educating children, and honoring veterans. And at our Veteran of the Month, we come back to the museum for cake and refreshments. And it brings people to the museum in a setting where they can speak about their deceased loved one and share that. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the museum's participation in that. The library at one time allowed us to have our meetings there. And we're always gracious in giving their space and time and availability. The parks folks were the folks that installed the kiosk for us down at the memorial, as well as our Veteran of the Month display stand down there where we put a flyer down there commemorating our deceased veterans. So that's all I can think of to say. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And as far as the story goes, the story starts in Independence. To me, I had this thought at the last council meeting, it would be tragic if the story stopped here. Without the museum to continue on the history of this fine community, without the library to have a place for things that are to come that can be read about our history, and without our great parks, the recreation department to have places for these stories to take place, I think it would be tragic to not include the museum in this levy option.
Thank you, Billy. I do appreciate you taking the time to come in, and thank you for your efforts on so many fronts. Mr. Mike Rhodes from Independence. Hello. Good evening.
So I'm here to talk numbers. And my understanding is that this document, you guys have this document with you? Because this is the document I understand that you've been provided to make the decisions about this levy and how much the levy should be and the justification for it. So I'd like to take a little bit of time to run through this, and I'll go as fast as I can. So on page 1, there's a statement that says, quote, measures 5 and 50 assessed values are limited to 3% annual growth, unquote. Another quote, the city has seen an average of 5% growth of assessed value over the past several years. Well, that's a contradiction to the 3%. And then third quote, city has seen an average of 9% growth in operating costs. Obviously that number comes from during the COVID period when things got economically out of control for a lot of unusual reasons. My understanding is that the city got COVID relief funds to help offset those kinds of expenses. So what's confusing is that the Oregon state budget currently says that the inflation rate is 3.6%, and the Fed is obviously on track to help curb inflation. So using a 9% growth in costs doesn't justify looking forward in what inflationary pressures are. And then another quote, real market value for this period is 7.8%. It's completely irrelevant to this discussion. It has nothing to do with taxes. Taxable assessed value, another quote, taxable assessed value has been limited to just over 4%. It's supposed to be 3%. On page 2, the document quotes, property tax revenues to the general fund have increased an average of 5% per year since 2019, consistent with the average increases in taxable assessed values. This same trend in growth is expected and projected for for several years without significant change, unquote. So if the general fund income stream is getting 5% a year and is expected to continue, and the inflation rate is 3.6% now and probably less going forward, I don't understand where the cash flow problem is. Another quote, we used library, museum, and parks that increased an average of 11% from 2019 to 2023, estimated. And then there's this table that you provided in here. And if you divide the numbers between 2019 and 2023, that 4-year finance segment is 33% total, or 8.25% per year, not 11%. Pointing out inconsistencies in the numbers that were used to justify what this levy amount is. Another quote, previously general fund expenditures were budgeted and planned based on a desired level of service and shortfalls. And shortfalls were transferred from water and sewer funds. This practice allowed for growth of services, unquote. I mean, I don't even, we've talked about this, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and frankly, I don't know how to call it other than malfeasance. And it's why you're struggling with the general funds, because it's been robbed to pay for other stuff. And so, okay, so let's move on. Page 3, quote, cities' essential services funded the general fund are comprised primarily of the police department. The cost of operating the city's police department, currently staffed, are greater than the total amount of property taxes that the city receives in a full year. That's true, but according to the city budget, that's not the only inflow to the general fund. Your total general fund inflow in the new budget that you just proposed is $6.2 million. And the police department is like $3.8 million. So, plus the museum, parks, and library. So we'll get to that. Just pointing out that the numbers don't add up here. And then in the city budget, there's this quote from the 2025, there's this quote of, there will be immediate and catastrophic failure of the general fund. And you show this graph in here of the funds diving off the ramp here. They go up next year, but then after that, they dive off in a straight line. I don't know what kind of budgeting is a straight line showing deficits. And then when you look at the graph that's in the handout that you guys provided, it shows it slowly decreasing, not diving off the cliff. It doesn't cross over until 2027. So, again, the information in the packet that was provided is incomplete and inconsistent
That's
with...
5 minutes, Mayor.
Yeah.
I have 2 more minutes, if I may.
We have a number of other people, so why don't you give one final thought of about 15 seconds, and then we'll move on to the next people, please.
Okay. Last point I'll make. Quote, page 4. City's general fund will continue to pay debt service on the museum building. The current outstanding principal on the loan is $413,000. Annual debt service is just under $74,000. Well, that's $6,000 a month.
That's 15 seconds, Mayor.
Thank you. If you have written comments, please feel free to share them with...
My point is, you guys ought to consider, for one thing, you shouldn't have taken out the loan, and
Thank you.
you ought to consider refinancing this thing to something more reasonable so you can improve your cash flow.
Thank you. Elizabeth Myers-Callahan from Salem. Good evening and welcome to Independence.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Myers-Callahan, and my grandfather was A.C. Moore, if you've been to the museum recently, and he was the mayor of Independence in 1916. He was an amateur photographer and passed down through our mother really historical photographs of the entire valley, but mostly of Independence and his family life. And so that is, where my heart goes. I will tell you that my mother was an archivist who just saved everything and put notes on it. And I know Amy and Natasha have appreciated that as we've donated things. But when it came to the donations, we really did consider that maybe we should be donating to the Polk County Historical Society rather than Independence, because we were trying to figure out where the best exposure was going to be for the items that we had. And my brother was alive then, and my sister and I still are, and we decided that the museum really was the place for these things because they are from Independence, and they photograph the streets here, the life here, and my grandparents' lives. And most of my ancestors are buried out on the Hilltop Cemetery. So, close to my heart, but I have to say the museum is a gem. I have visited all across the United States, hundreds of museums, because I love museums, but you really should step back and realize what you have right in your midst. It is something absolutely wonderful. It's one of the best in Oregon, I think that's come up. Amy was even saying some of it is Smithsonian quality with artifacts and pictures and things to back it up. So please consider, I'm a teacher, I love schools and libraries and playgrounds and everything else, but don't let the museum suffer. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. Next person I have is Evan Source from here in Independence.
All right, City Council, City staff, members of the public, good evening. My name is Evan Source. I reside at 1126 South 8th Street here in Independence, and I'm a member of the Heritage Museum Society. Our president, Jim, kind of gave you a great overview of what we do at the Museum Society, and I just wanted to talk about fundraising. But before I get there, I wanted to really emphasize that this conversation is about what kind of community do we want to live in, and what kind of community do we want to raise our children in. And I, for one, want to make sure that our community has the services and supports that a great museum, a wonderful library, and productive parks offer our community. So in previous meetings I've attended, there's been a lot of discussion about fundraising at the museum. And I just want to make sure folks on this council know that we've heard those discussions. We were present at all 5 of the concerts in the park this year, wearing our Hot Baby Dog shirts, and we raised well over $3,000 for the museum, selling hundreds of bottles of water, hundreds of hot dogs, and most importantly, probably about 400 popsicles. So that money will go right to the museum to help support it. But I mean, it's pennies compared to what we're talking about in the needed support. You know, you've asked the museum staff to ensure that the museum is used, the museum is relevant to all of our community, and I think that that's what our museum staff has done. And you can see it in the attendance numbers. In 2022, our attendance, since 2022, our attendance has increased 180%. We're on pace for, oh, I had that note. I can't read my own writing. So we're on pace for over 180% increase in turnout since 2022 when we moved into that museum. And finally, as we talked about 32,000 hours, or 3,200 hours of volunteer work in that museum. I don't know of any other place in this community that can say that we had 3,200 hours of volunteer time. That equates, if we're talking about $15 an hour, to over $48,000 that the city did not have to spend in hours keeping that museum open, talking to people, ensuring that those exhibits are accessible for our entire community. So what I ask for all of you is to give us the opportunity to show you all that we are here to support the museum, the park, and the library, and we're willing to pay more to do that. So I encourage you to refer option 1 to the ballot, which includes the library, the park, and museum. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for coming in tonight. Next person to speak is David Klein from here in Independence. Good evening, Mr. Klein.
Good evening, thank you, Mayor, members of council. So I come from this with a slightly different perspective, a couple of different things. I having served as your former city manager for some 8.5 years, I probably have an intimate understanding of your budget, and many of you don't. I think there is a path that you're not considering, and I think it's unfortunate it's not before you. A couple of thoughts. One, I think it's important to understand as a whole community, you're going to the ballot. I assume you want to ballot if you pass one of these options in front of you. At the same time, it's likely the school will be going to the ballot with this measure. That's an unfortunate situation because it's going to present people with a choice when it's really not, when it's already tough to pass property tax levies. The schools have been trying for a lot of years to get a capital program through, and they failed the last time. It was a close call. I hate to see that happen to them again. The second piece of this is, and you have a letter from me that maybe spends a little more detail, a little more time talking about this. But back 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, I was standing up here, I was wearing a tie, and we were talking to you, and we talked as a community, as a board, about what we were going to do for real financial problems that we're having at the time, much more severe problems than you're having now. That was on the heels of the Great Recession. We had built the city complex using a revenue bond. We had failed projections on our urban renewal district, so things were coming a little bit apart at the seams. We had already cut our workforce by 25%, and we were at risk of having to cut our workforce another 25%. We went to the public at that time and said, if you will pass this measure, this property tax measure, we will sustain those services. And the public, with most of your help on the city council, with you walking the streets, knocking on doors, that we will do that. We will do that with over 12% more yays than nays. A resounding plus for, a resounding yes for a property tax measure in any community. What was the promise at that time? The promise at that time was that we would sustain city services. So that bond measure that you all passed then back in 2013, we're still paying on that. And we will be paying on that for another 10 years. I don't know how that factors into the two options that you have in front of you and what happens to those proceeds in terms of the balance sheet. But it doesn't feel like it's being taken into account. I will say, in just one, in light of that, I think there's an alternative way to go forward. I think, with the budget choices that have been made in the past several years that have said that let's redirect funds away from general fund back to the public works or into the public works funds and utility funds. I think it was an admirable choice, but it wasn't a choice that led you where you are. It was a choice that led you to where you are today with a gigantic shortfall on what you're calling non-essential services. I don't think any of these services are non-essential. I think all these services are essential to why people live here. The parks are a thing of beauty. They're wonderful. This river access we have is without compare anywhere in the state. The museum, you've heard all about the museum tonight. Amazing job that you did. It wasn't on my watch. I think you've done an amazing job creating this museum asset. The library was another piece that was voted on by the public back in the early 2000s. Again, what happens to that commitment if these measures don't pass? Do we have a building we built and not run it? All I'm saying is there's another path. I would urge you to take this off the ballot so as not to compete with the school district and think of another creative way of doing this. I think there's more that can be done to save those services without hurting everything else that you try to do as a city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Vicki McCubbin from here in Independence. Good evening, welcome to council.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, councilors, and city staff. My name is Vicki McCubbin. I live in the Independence Air Park, and I promise to be brief. I love our parks, and I have been a long-time volunteer at both the library and the museum, participating in events and tours for both children and adults. I've been a member of both of the advisory boards and still on the library advisory board, have been on the Museum Society, Friends of the Library, and so I've experienced firsthand the importance of both of these local institutions. I've been listening to and watching the budget meetings and council deliberations for the past several months as you have considered how to fund these resources for our community. Tonight you'll be voting on the resolution for the local option levy ballot measure for funding for our city library, museum, and parks. I'm here to thank all of you for your thorough deliberation, study, and thoughtful consideration that you have given to get to this point. And I'm also here to support the funding of all three of the services through the levy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's the public comment. We're gonna keep moving here. There's a mayor report and a city manager report, and then we'll go to the discussion. So yes?
Mayor, would you like to move the city manager report to the end so that everyone can get through the levy?
Okay.
I would be willing to do that if you would
If
like.
you're okay with that, then I can move my stuff also.
Absolutely.
Anybody have any objection? Okay, then we'll do that. And Mr. Mooney, I think you and the city manager are up for discussion of the local option levy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. First of all, I want to begin by saying thank you for everyone for their comments. I appreciate that this is a difficult conversation to have, and I appreciate your positions. So staff is asking that council place a 5-year local option levy on the November ballot. We have provided council with 2 options for said levy. The first, $1.82 per thousand of taxable assessed value to fund the museum, library, and parks operations for a period of 5 years. The second option is $1.49 per thousand of taxable assessed value to fund the library and parks. So, I'm gonna take my glasses off so I can read my notes. So all of these services, library, parks, museum, are currently funded from revenues within the general fund. For the last several years, general fund revenues, including property taxes, have been increasing an average of 5%. It's key to note that while statutory limitations on taxable assessed value are 3%, they are also impacted by new growth, new construction, new development in the community. That has contributed to the 5% number. Operating costs have increased 9 to 11% over that same 5-year period. It's more than just simply the inflationary impacts on materials and services costs, but other costs have impacted personnel services, which are the largest part of our budget. Things like increases in PERS rates, increases in medical insurance premiums, et cetera, that cause that number to sometimes be higher than what we know to be the inflationary rate. We've been challenged to live within our means. I understand that. I think we all understand that. Current operations of the museum, library, and parks are simply unsustainable. The levy gives the community a voice in what services they want to pay for, or that they're willing to pay for. As we've heard, both the museum and the library receive some funding from their respective Friends programs, which are separate 501c3 not-for-profit organizations and unrelated legally to the city. These contributions are important, but have not been of an amount or consistency to bridge that city funding gap, as we've heard tonight. With the passage of the public safety fee during the budget discussions for 24-25, that changed that slope of the general fund deficit from what we were talking about in the budget message to the slope that you saw on the more recent materials related to this issue. So, real quickly to summarize the 2 options. Option 1, again, provides funding for the museum, library, and parks at current service levels for 5 years. Expected revenues range from $1.14 million in the first year to 1.4 million in the 5th and final year of the levy. Option 2 provides funding for library and parks at current service levels for 5 years, with revenues ranging from $935,000 in year 1 to $1.13 million in year 5. And I real quickly wanted to call your attention to the changes in the wording for the ballot title that you received. Those were on advice of legal counsel after reviewing the information and trying to clarify, the exact use of those levy dollars. With that, I take any questions from council.
Questions for the presenter?
Yes.
Councilor Morton.
Could you speak to the comments that we heard about using the utility fund to raise the general fund?
I can. So, in previous years, under previous administrations, the general fund budget was developed based on expected or desired levels of service, was compared to available general fund revenues from sources like property taxes, franchise fees, those state shared revenues, and the gaps, if there were any, were then transferred from the utility funds to the general fund to balance the fund and support all the general fund services. I believe that's a true statement. The issue with that is that, for example, water rates are developed using a set of information that's based on operational costs for operating the water utility, capital needs, all things water. Those water rates are then paid by our citizens with the expectation, I believe, now this is my opinion, this little bit of it, but those water rates are paid to support water-related services, water-related operations. In my background and in my experience, there's sort of an unwritten covenant with ratepayers that utility rates are to support utility operations. And I know that's a difficult thing to talk about up here, but that's my understanding of the relationship between utility rates and support to the general fund. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I just have a very brief follow-up. I understand that there was a more stringent set of rules and standards from the state level that were applied to our city once it went over the 10,000 population. And it's important for us to be careful.
It's also a situation where, were we to go out for financing for future water or sewer or storm drain projects, that the bonding community or the financing community looks at how we spend those dollars in terms of rates. They'll look at, how that money is used in support of the specific or respective utility operations.
Thank you. A question, go ahead.
So we have fees to support MyNet and our water bills and other bills as well. So we already have precedents that we don't mind taking from our water bill to pay other things in our general fund. My question, though, I have two, is it is possible to do what Mr. Klein has suggested, to look at this and safely distribute money so that we do not have to put an additional tax burden on our populace and still save the things we treasure in our community, correct?
It's legal to do so.
Right. So, and that's something we probably should have examined a lot more closely before we pushed our budget through, so that we could save these things without going to this extreme. My other question is on the wording of these levies. It says there's a 20-word limit. So when if this passes here tonight and goes to our community, is it only the question that has the 20-word limit, or is the 20-word limit the whole paragraph underneath that.
So if you're referring to like the extra sentence there that throws it over
Right.
20 words, that is required language by statute, does not count against the 20-word limit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So one quick comment about the Minette dollars included in rates. I don't believe that's a correct characterization. I believe money was taken from the water fund to support Minette, but I don't believe those amounts were directly included in the rate calculations. I believe it's somewhat similar to what was done here previously. The water fund had money, and so it was used to support Minette.
And it still is.
We're not paying money to Minette anymore. They are paying us back.
Okay, additional questions? I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What is the impact if this levy does not pass? And I did let the city manager know about this a couple days ago, and so I anticipate that you probably have or between the two of you, a joint answer on this.
Well, and I appreciate the heads up on the question. I'm going to address it from a strictly financial perspective, and then I'll allow the city manager to speak more to the administrative workings that would go through. Assuming that the levy does not pass, and assuming that then we closed all the doors, basically shut down the library, shut down the museum, and shut down the parks. What that would do is generate basically the $1 million that currently goes to fund those operations to the bottom line of the general fund. It would move it into contingency and would, in effect, stabilize our contingency in the general fund at a level that it probably should be at. Going forward, then the city would be in a position to hopefully more effectively keep pace with the increases in costs and use that available fund balance as a buffer as we continue to strive for new resources or additional reductions as may be necessary in the future.
So if the levy doesn't pass, all three entities completely shut down, not a,
I'm just saying, if that were to happen, that's what would happen with the dollars. It's not my choice.
I think the city manager can address that.
So if the levy doesn't pass, then things go.
I'm
Then,
happy to give this up.
you're right. Then what we do is a policy decision, and this is how it will work. We'll have a lot of work sessions. We'll talk about a lot of things. It's not an operational decision. You will have to make that decision. What options and the plots, the things that we have run through, looking at the museum, a reduction in staff, closure of the museum, removal of the exhibits and collections to the appropriate agencies, and a reminder that building is mortgaged. It's $87,000 per year, so we're gonna have to continue to maintain it, pay utilities on it, and pay insurance on it, unless we decide to sell it. Those are all decisions that you'll have to make as we move through work sessions. On the parks, reduction in maintenance, both in-house and vendors, reduction of in-house staff, removal of porta potties throughout the parks, closure of the parks, including removal and sale of the play equipment. On those parks, we'll have to continue to pay insurance. On the library, a reduction in staff. We'll still have to pay insurance, utilities, and maintenance. Sell the equipment, deal with the collections that we own, return the CCRLS collections, sell or lease the building, of which there's not a lot of demand. All of those decisions will have to be made as we move forward. Remember, the museum, the library, and the parks are funded through June 30th, so all of these hard decisions will come in time. We will have to, if this doesn't pass in November, we'll have to talk about what do you want to do, what phasing, and what timing. Does that answer your question, Mayor?
I answered the question. Additional questions for this presenter?
I'm sorry. I was
Councilor
gonna say,
Schwartzler.
Mayor, if I may, I have some additional information, on the counselor, on a question Councilor Roden asked. So Rob touched on the fact that if we take money from water and sewer, what that does is it puts us in a position where we may not be able to get funding for absolutely essential water and sewer projects. I was told when I first came here that if we continued, and I was told by a funder, if we continued to do it the way we had been doing it, they would not be able to fund us. If we do not have water and sewer, we do not have a city. I had one of my staff take a look at how much money was pulled from water, sewer, transportation, approximately 8 years. The sewer loss was almost $7 million. The water loss was $6,249,000. The stormwater was just under $1 million. Transportation was just under $900,000. If we had those in our funds, imagine the work we could have had done. We wouldn't have to get loans. We wouldn't have to try and find grants. We would not have biosolids sitting at the top of our lagoon number 1 with that smell wandering through our community. If we had had all of those millions of dollars that were pulled over to the general fund over 8 years, we would not be fighting for every grant dollar that we have to try and make sure that our community has quality, consistent water. We would not have maintenance lines that are falling apart because we could have done the work. I hope that helps answer that question. Councilor Schwartz, my apologies.
My question regarding the levy language is when we're looking at this, did we pull out things that historically have been volunteer-led? I think it's really important that when we go to the voters to ask them to approve these costs, that we are cognizant that we are asking them to cover basic services. And I know we have leaned heavily on our volunteers, and the volunteers in our community have really stepped up. But I look at things like the Ghost Walk, Coding League, some of the field trips, that sort of thing, where we need to be looking at, can those things be covered by volunteers? Can we look for other funding sources so that when we are going to the voters, we are absolutely making sure that they are funding the essential services that are very using parks?
To answer your question, Councilor, we netted out those pieces of revenue that we could identify. In terms of volunteer services, they're very difficult to quantify, if you will, so I can honestly say probably not a great deal of those are identified in these cost figures. But things like the regional monies that the library gets from CCRLS, that's been factored into those amounts.
And I think this could probably be more of a wording and how we take it out to the community. I just want to be really careful about how we present this to the community in terms of messaging that we're asking them for essential services.
So are there additional questions of this staff at this point? Go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out the museum part of it. So when it was decided that they wanted to do the new building, the new loan, the new renovations, I think it was like $1 million, was it known that we were not doing well financially, or was it just, like, this was a surprise?
It's pretty raw, I don't know.
Yeah, so that was before both Rob and I were here. What I can say is, this weekend, I was finally, after 2 years of being here, going through all the old files in my office and moving them so I can actually move my files in. I found an article that in 2020, the city was moving towards best practices. That's 2 years before I got here. So I don't know when the museum went into effect, but in 2020 we were moving towards best practices, which includes where we're going, of not taking money from water and sewer. But that's all I know nothing else.
And
Additional questions from presenters? Okay, thank you for the presentation. Thank you. Okay, we need to make some decisions. And how do we want to do this? We could just talk about things, or somebody can make a motion, or what do you want to do? How would you like to approach this?
I'll make a motion, Mayor. Option one, move that council approve resolution number 24-1614 to place the local option levy supporting the museum, library, and parks on the November 5th, 2024 ballot.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a second to that motion. Now we have discussion. What do you think? Please.
I think this leaves a bad taste in my mouth. When we had time, when we were doing the budget for this year, to go over every issue that we could have gone over, to try to see where we could find funding to save these things. I do not want the museum to close. I do not want the library and parks to suffer. But I don't want to put on people's backs a tax burden that they cannot afford at this time. We should have exhausted all of our efforts during the budgeting process to see if we could have gotten money from other sources in our budget. And we failed to do that. And I've said that over and over and over again. When the budget was pushed through, we did not have the opportunity to look at these things. I've looked at other cities' budgets, I've looked at Will County's budget, and we are the only city that I could find that pays for our museums and libraries out of the general fund. I think it's a bad idea. We should never have been in that predicament to begin with. Now, the city manager's gonna stand up and say, well, in Baker City, they pay for theirs out of theirs. Well, you know, you're gonna find something that goes against what I'm saying. We should just never have been in this financial spot to begin with. That being said, we could look at other things before we put it to the taxpayers, because everybody's coming to me right now saying they can't afford school supplies. They can't afford to feed their kids. They can't afford to go back to school. They can't afford their property taxes that they have right now. Why wouldn't we exhaust every effort we had as a council before we put this before the voters? And for that reason, I don't support this.
Mr. Mayor?
Please do.
To say that we didn't exhaust every avenue is not true. We had several options that were presented to us. We had time to read them, we had time to think about them. Of the 18 that were presented, I found value in 2. And we discussed those 2, and we voted on those 2. Many of them would have added additional workload to an already maxed out staff. Many of them would not have raised enough revenue to make a difference.
Thank you. Other councilors would like to speak.
I'm just looking at, how much, I think the fire district levy, is gonna be on this new one, and then this, if the local option levy passes, it won't be until 2025, I believe, but still coming quickly. And then the $20 a month on our public safety fee, so I was just mine's about $1,000 a year, I don't know where everybody else is. And then with the school district coming, most people are about gonna be around $1,300, $1,400 a year with all of these new levies and taxes and such, and I just think it's such a burden on people, and I don't support this as well.
Other councilors make comments. Councilor Schwartzler.
I know this is a difficult decision, and we are asking a lot of our community right now, especially with, we're faced with rate hikes everywhere. I mean, notifications that our utility bills are going up outside of the city, school districts, it's a difficult discussion right now, difficult time for people. We're asking a lot of our community, we're asking a lot of our volunteers to fill gaps, but I do think it's an appropriate place to ask community to provide input on this and to vote on how they want to see happen in this community, what they want to see happen in this community.
Other councilors who wish to speak before I go to the second round?
I just want to remind folks that what we're doing is we are sending this to the community. We are not saying we are passing a levy of $1.43 or $1.82. What we're doing tonight is trusting the voters in the community to decide for themselves the value of these services. So I will be in support. I do share Councilor Schwarzer's concerns, and that I think that the organization should look at some of those activities that have been previously funded elsewhere or put on by volunteers, that if those events like a levy are that important to our community, then they will continue. Our community will see that. We know that they make happen the things that are important to them.
Other people who haven't spoken the first time, please do.
I also am in support of this. Do I like it? No. Do I want to pay more taxes? No. But I do want the museum and the parks and the library to continue. And I can only compare it on the basis of what it would be for me at my house, and it comes down to fund this, to add the museum to this levy cost an additional $10 a month to me. And we are talking about possibly doing some kind of, we've all heard about, we should have a fee for visiting the museum. Well, I know there's a museum down the road that charges $5 a head to come in and look at the museum. That would be 2 visits to the museum. I can go as many times as I want for $10 a month in additional taxes. I think this is very important to the community, and we are doing something. We are asking the community what they think. Were things managed the way that they should have been in the past? I don't know. We as council members have to depend on information that we receive from city staff on how decisions are made. I think there is excellent transparency now. I think you've heard good explanation of why things are the way they are, but it comes down to this is a democracy and the voters should have the right to decide, and that's what we're giving to them.
Councilor Roden, I think you'd like to speak.
Yeah, I'm just so tired of being called a liar up here. I know darn well if anybody goes back and looks at the budget committee hearing, they will hear that the call of question was brought up prematurely. The call of question means that we have to approve the budget before we had the opportunity to really look at all the aspects of the budget. So review that, and you will see that that's what happened. And there were at least 4 members of the budget committee who stood up and said, please, give us an opportunity to look at this budget so we don't have to go to these extremes. It was asked, review the videos. I did not lie about that. I'm not misleading anybody here. The other thing is, I do not believe that we won't get funding in the future from things because we take from other funds. I think it's definitely something we should look into to get further information on. I think Mr. Klein is right. We should look at possible other revenue sources within our budget before we put this on the backs of our community. And if at the end of this, if this fails, and we have to have a series of work sessions where we all work our tails off to make sure that we keep the library, museum, and parks open, we should have done those work sessions prior to putting it on the taxpayers' backs. We should have done this work beforehand, so we didn't have to do this. So we could go to the taxpayers and say, we did 40 hours of work sessions, and this is honestly the only way we can fund these things, but we didn't do that. And because we didn't do that, I don't feel comfortable asking people to do work that we weren't willing to do.
Other people would like to speak.
I don't know if I can ask this or not, but this do's and don'ts that you gave us, if this passes, can we have some clarification on what we are or aren't, or is this even?
It doesn't affect you.
Okay, I was hoping
That
that,
is for-
because as I tried to read the ORS and I thought that was, it's just city employees and
It's city employees, boards, appointed boards and commissions, not elected officials.
not us.
So you receive that because you're a liaison to an appointed board.
Perfect, thank you.
Additional comments people want to make? I will. I think it's important that we decide what we want in our community. Those of us sitting here, we pay the same things. You know, we pay taxes, we also use the services, and I think it's important that we're going to let people decide what they want to have in our community, how they want our community to be put together, and where we are going to be for the future. So we're going to be offering, there's going to be a choice, and people are going to make a choice, and we'll go from there. And so I think that that's important. It's probably that's enough for me to talk. Okay, without objection, there's a motion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that is Core, Martin Willis, Morton, and Schwartzman. And opposed.
Opposed.
And that's Broden and Joe. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we've been sitting for a while. I'm going to declare a 5-minute recess, then we'll come back and do reports and Geraldisms. So we're in recess.
He's mad at us. Fireball. She's a handful already. We asked her to deal with that, so she can have fun.
I had to,
Yeah. Years ago, I went through. And.
Not as far as.
Okay. We ready to go, Karen? All right, staff ready to go?
Yes, sir.
All right, we're gonna go back to the regular schedule here. I'm gonna go get back to my brief report, and we're gonna go to city manager report, and then we'll Geraldize. And just to follow up on a couple things since our last council meeting, I met with several community members regarding the life jackets and signs, along with staff. We had good conversations, and city staff is following up on the details to move that project forward. As I joined several of you attending the swearing in of a new officer here in Independence. It was great to see folks. I did attend the funeral for former Senator Peter Courtney. I worked with Peter for a long time, and I want to let it be known, Peter Courtney went to bat for this city on more than a few occasions. It wasn't out in front of the whole world. He went to bat for us when the international telecoms were trying to do it to us. And he was one of our allies that helped us when we needed it, and had the pleasure of working with him for a long time. And I learned a lot from him, and I can tell some other stories. Had the opportunity I was invited to speak with members of the Benton County Planning Commission, talking about housing and what we're doing up here, what's being done in our area. Also, they're introducing us to a builder who does cottage clusters, which I know is very close to some people, and making them fiscally work, which is a real challenge. Took part representing the community health assessment put on by a number of the insurance companies and the health folks. It happens about every five years. Attended, as some of you also did, the National Night Out, and I wanted to call out that several of the officers that are in the room tonight were there, and they're having it. What's so nice is that members of our community, from very small children to older adults, get a chance to visit with firefighters, with police officers, with a number of folks that do good things in this community, and see them as people, as participants in the community, not as enforcers, but as partners and teammates and people that serve our community, and I think it's a wonderful thing. The COG Legislative Committee is hosting a meeting with legislators. That's coming up later in the month. Councilors, you got an invitation to attend that. That's coming up. Attended the Veterans Memorial event last Saturday. As one of our speakers pointed out, that's something that happens every month. That it's an important thing for a number of folks in our community. Was invited and attended the Oregon Community Foundation's regional gathering, where I had a chance to visit with a number of funders and OCF board members and organizations. And I also want to just remind councilors that Thursday, August 29th, we have a joint work session with the Monmouth City Council to talk we'll have a conversation about a proposed transfer station along with Polk County. So that will take place on the 29th. That's my report, and I turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor.
So we've announced it publicly, but I want to officially announce how incredibly pleased I am that Sergeant Tino Benuelos has accepted the offer to become our new police chief. He will fill the lieutenant position beginning on October 1st, and then January 1st of 2025, he will take over as our new police chief, because we'll say goodbye to Bob December 31st. So council, sometimes I talk about a little more esoteric things, and tonight's gonna be a little esoteric. Maybe not. So last meeting, a person I never met, I'd never spoken to, doesn't know me, ranted for about 5 minutes on how attorneys are awful, scummy, and dishonest. I could only assume that that individual had a bad experience with an attorney at some point. But it's this kind of fear-mongering and ignorant generalization of a group of people that resulted in the formation of the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis. And the only way to fight ignorant generalization is by education. So I'm gonna take a minute, and I'm gonna educate our community, anyone who listens to this, on attorneys, because we're not bad people. In fact, many are incredible people. And I'm gonna start with Abraham Lincoln. Honestly, you should take no introduction. The 16th President of the United States of America, who became a lawyer in 1836, and he practiced law, bankruptcy law, railroad law, corporate law. He practiced law until 1860, when he became the president. During his time as a lawyer, as president, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Again, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. That should take no introduction. In 1863, when he freed the slaves of the Confederated States. I think he was a scummy corporate lawyer, but that's my opinion. Let's talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an acclaimed lawyer, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, and professor at Rutgers University Law School and Columbia University. She was an advocate for gender equality, and successfully fought in the United States versus Virginia case, which allowed women to be admitted to the formerly male-only Virginia Military Institute. She was a lawyer. I don't think she was a scummy lawyer. Let's come a little closer to home. Let's talk about Oswald West. Yeah, that name should sound familiar. Oswald West State Park, anyone? West Hall at Oregon State University, both named after Oswald West. My husband is Craig Oswald West. Oz is his great uncle. Oz filled the role of uncle to my husband. Oswald West was a lawyer. He became governor of Oregon in 1911. While governor, that lawyer established Oregon's beach highway law, proclaiming the entire Pacific coastline to the high tide line to be a public highway, thereby preserving the entire scenery and beach access for you, for me, for our kids, for our grandkids. I don't think that's a scummy lawyer. The law protecting public access to the high water line remains in effect, and were formally protected by the Oregon legislature and Governor Tom McCall in 1967. Do you know Governor West, a lawyer, also established Oregon's highway system and established the Office of the State Forester and the Bureau of Forestry? Now I'm bringing it even closer to home. I'm a lawyer. I'm not even close to the same league as Abraham Lincoln or Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Oz West. I'm just your everyday lawyer, trying to do the right thing for the community that I serve, just like most other lawyers out there who are trying to do the right thing for their communities, their clients, and their families. Even before I was an attorney, I served the people around me. I volunteered in the evenings after working all day and going to school at a low-cost, free legal clinic, not as a lawyer, as a secretary, that served mainly women who were fleeing domestic violence or other situations with young children. I continue to serve. I continue to serve by helping youth to have access to recreational activities, courses they would never have the opportunity, ever. I also help multiple animal rescues as they do the amazing work of rescuing abused and neglected animals. I currently have a long-term foster horse and a rescue dog at my home. I'm not anyone special, I'm just an attorney, doing what most attorneys do, serving others. I have friends I graduated law school with. I have one who's working to save girls and women who have been victims of human trafficking. He puts himself in places we shouldn't go to try and help them, to give them a second life because theirs was taken away. He's a lawyer. I don't think that's scummy. I have a friend that I went to law school with. He's saving manatees. Attorneys are intelligent, driven, caring individuals who went to law school because they wanted to serve, they wanted to help. And more often than not, they give back more to their communities than they have ever taken. So let me finish on this topic by reading something that I posted on Facebook a few weeks ago, because it's relevant. Why must it be either my way or your way? Why can't we compromise? Why must someone who doesn't believe as you do be wrong, rather than having simply lived a different story than yours? Why the anger and the ugliness towards others, rather than grace and compassion? When did harassment and bullying become acceptable behavior? When did division become the fashion? When did anger become the first emotion? When did we as a society forget how to discuss with kindness, find a way to collaborate, and truly listen to others? How do we find our way back to understanding, compassion, empathy, and collaboration? I think our first step is kindness. Simply be kind. Practice kindness. Say something nice to someone you don't know, or perhaps you don't agree with tomorrow. Do something kind for someone you don't know, or perhaps don't agree with the next day. Then repeat every day of your life. Imagine the world we could build. So I challenged that individual who ranted for 5 minutes against attorneys at our last meeting, and everyone else. Do something good with your time. Set aside ugliness and negativity. Create something beautiful. Help those around you be a human or animal. Follow the path set by those attorneys you learned about today. Be a kinder, better person than you were yesterday. And thank you for letting me talk about that esoteric topic. I want to go on to something pretty amazing. Last week, city staff hosted and toured a number of wonderful youth from CSD, 6th to 8th graders. We showed them how the city works, IT, police, and Chief Tino was a huge part of that tour. Emmanuel, our communications, was a huge part of that tour. And we talked about city government. And we received these great thank you notes, and I want to share them with you because they're incredible. Thank you for an outstanding field trip. Hands down, one of our favorites of the summer. We appreciate all the investment of time in our students to help them see themselves as leaders. Thank you for the wonderful photos. I think before our field trip, the students were kind of wondering why we're going to a building to see how a city works. And now it looks like we have future citizen leaders on our hands. They talked nonstop about the trip on the way back to the school. Thank you for such an engaging way of learning hands-on. P.S. I'd like to add how special it was to see community leaders not only acknowledge our students' bilingualism, but to celebrate it by helping them see how wonderful it can be to be multilingual as a leader and helping students envision themselves in all the roles we saw. And that includes sitting in those chairs that you're in tonight. So, thank you, Council.
And I think you get to be up there again.
I do.
Okay. So, thank you for your report. We're going to go to a public hearing and community development block grant. I'm going to officially open the public hearing with a staff report, and our city manager is filling in for Mr. Irvine.
I am, thank you. There are a number of quick things to talk about. You have all seen a CDBG before. This particular CDBG is it's a grant, and it's a community development block grant from Business Oregon. This is what we call a pass-through grant. So we are The CDBG can only be received by certain entities, the city is one of them. So we will receive the grant, we will pass it through to another agency. And that agency is, we're calling it the Child Care Business Development Programming, which would fund a child care licensing and business development program for 1 year located in Independence, but serving the entire Polk County. It is estimated that the proposed project will benefit at least 20 entrepreneurs who are seeking to start a child care business, of whom at least 51% will be low or moderate income. Now, Mayor, I will leave this up to you as a part of the hearing. I do have to read a relatively long document, and Karen's going to have to note that I read it. There are a couple of folks who, from the agency that will be receiving that grant, who can speak now, and I can read this later, or I can read this down and bring them up later at your discretion, Mayor.
She's signaling that she's gonna let you orate.
Okay. Then, settle in, y'all, and Karen, be sure and mark that I read this in its entirety. The City of Independence is eligible to apply for a 2024 Community Development Block Grant from Business Oregon. Community Development Block Grant funds come from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The grants can be used for public facilities and housing improvements, primarily for persons with low and moderate incomes. Approximately $12 million will be awarded to Oregon non-metropolitan cities and counties in 2024, The maximum grant that a city or county can receive is $250,000 for a child care program. The City of Independence is preparing an application for 2024 Community Development Block Grant from Business Oregon for Child Care Business Development Programming, which would fund a child care licensing and business development program for 1 year located in Independence but serving Polk County. A public hearing will be held by the Independence City Council at 6:30 p.m. on August 13, 2024 at the City Hall, 555 Southwest Main Street, Independence. The purpose of this hearing is for the Independence City Council to obtain citizen views and to respond to questions and comments about the child care business development programming that would fund child care licensing and business development programs that might be assisted with a community development block grant project. Written comments are also welcome and must be received by August 7, 2024 at 555 South Main Street, Independence, Oregon 97351. Both oral and written comments will be considered by the Independence City Council in deciding whether to apply. The location of the hearing is accessible to persons with disabilities. Please contact Karen Johnson, City Recorder, at 503-838-1212. If you will need any special accommodations to attend or participate in the meeting. To attend via telephone or other electronic means, please contact Karen Johnson at 503-837-1172 for attendance information. For information about Oregon Community Development Block Grants, the proposed project, and records about the City of Independence's past use of Community Development Block Grant funds is available for public review at City Hall, 555 South Main Street, Independence, during regular office hours. Advance notice is requested. If special accommodations are needed, please notify Karen Johnson, City Recorder, at 503-838-1212, so that appropriate assistance can be provided. Permanent involuntary displacement of persons or businesses is not anticipated as a result from the proposed project. If displacement becomes necessary, alternatives will be examined to minimize the displacement and provide required reasonable benefits to those displaced. Any low and moderate income housing that is demolished or converted to another use will be replaced.
Thank you for reading the required document.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I'm going to invite Lucy Escobar, who's requested to speak on this from Salem. Good evening and welcome to City Council. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. I was going to say good afternoon, but we were moved on the agenda, so I can say good evening, Mayor and members of the council and city staff as well as the community. My name is Lucy Escobar, and I am the Capacious Leadership Institute project manager for Primeros Pasos for staff early childhood education and care. Our organization has been serving the Mid-Willamette Valley for approximately 45 years. We're thrilled to partner with the City of Independence on the CDBG grant to offer basic business training for early childhood educators. This program is a replica or a replication of an existing program that we currently are leading, supporting families. The program was created to support families and farm workers to make sure that they have accessible childcare, in which this program is available in Spanish and English as well. Since launching the program, we have tremendous success in other communities. Within the program, we have been able to serve about 130 participants benefiting from the service. Our goal within Primeros Pasos First Step is to enhance childcare options for working families, including farm workers, by empowering local entrepreneurs in general and generate new job opportunities within the community. The program is designed to provide high-quality business education and mentorship to childcare educators, serving an in-person cohort of approximately 20 future educators, which this actually collectively will serve about 200 children in your community. Our initiative is built from 4 pillars. One is early childhood education workforce development. This is when we have the opportunity to strengthen the skills of the early childhood educators. 2 is early education curriculum, meaning that we integrate relevant content and resources into early education. 3rd is recruitment and advocacy. It is important for us to promote the importance of early childhood education and recruiting the best in class and dedicated professionals. And 4th, learning resources, providing educators with valuable tools and materials to enhance their teaching practices. By collaborating with the City of Independence, we're investing in the future of the City of Independence and the community, as well as fostering economic growth and development. So I do want to thank you for your support, and this concludes my participation.
Great, are there questions for either of the presenters? Councilor Court.
I just want some clarification. The grant is for childcare licensing and business, not education, correct? I understand your program is broader.
Yeah.
Correct?
Marshall, I'm gonna ask Marshall, because Marshall actually wrote the grant
We're in the process.
in the process.
Yeah, there's a multi-step process. So,
You want to step up to the microphone while we're at this, so.
Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, my understanding is the grant was for childcare business development and not childhood education. But I recognize that your program is broader than what we're talking about here tonight.
correct, this is for licensure of child care providers.
Okay.
And for those of you who haven't met, Marshall is our grant writer. Marshall is great.
Thank you for coming to see. Additional questions for the presenters this evening? Okay, and is there anybody else who has any, this is the public comment part? Hearing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed, and we move on to the next item. We don't have to do anything other than hold a public hearing.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Fisher, Polk County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. Please.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. The next 2 resolutions are really housekeeping items. The county's natural hazard mitigation plan, we did an update in 2024, and it's a mechanism that we use to get access to FEMA funds and other grant funding. So the resolution is required by FEMA that each agency that participated in it pass their piece of it through a resolution. And then all of those will go forward in the adoption of the county's plan. So do you have any questions specific to it?
Do you want to kind of give a thumbnail sketch for anybody who's watching online, what this really does and is about?
So there are.
Thumbnail. The reason I said that is because
it allows us access to money in the event of an emergency, or if we want to go after grants for resiliency so we can withstand an emergency. That's really what this is. It opens the door for us to get money from the federal government through grants.
Questions for the presenter? This is an action item. Oh, go ahead if that was a question.
Gerald, are you saying that if there was an emergency and we had not done this, that FEMA would not give us any money? Or
Yeah. Exactly. If you don't do the work and put this in the plan, it jeopardizes your ability to get FEMA money.
Okay, as an action item, I appreciate a motion.
I I move to adopt resolution 24-1611.
Second.
I have a motion, a second by Court. Further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. You wish to take to the next one, please, on adopt water management and conservation plan.
Yes, so the water management conservation plan was completed. We talked about it before when we were doing the rate adjustments. The state has reviewed it and found that it complied with all of the requirements for the water management conservation plan. It's in OAR Chapter 690, Division 86. But it was also a requirement for us to get a final order on an extension for permit for one of our water rights. So we did all of that work, and actually, in passing the rate resolution, you've already completed 3 of the items that are in that plan, so good job. But the final step is to pass the resolution adopting the conservation management plan.
Questions? Please do.
On page 129 of our packet, which is file -7 of the municipal water supply implement plan, it talks about new water rights, and it states that analysis of alternative sources of additional water is required if acquisition of the new water rights will be necessary within the next 20 years.
Which part? My numbering is probably different.
5.8.
Which is it?
It's up on the screen.
Yes.
858. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, it says 5.7 on the bottom of my page,
57.
but it's actually 5.8. Water rights. Does
Which-
that mean if we accept this plan that we have to do this on this
What-
page?
Are you talking about new water rights, Counselor?
Yes.
If you read the last sentence, the city does not intend to acquire new water rights to meet its demands within the next 20 years, so the provisions of this section are not applicable.
Right, but we are doing that.
No,
right?
we already have our water rights in place.
Right.
Well, you finish.
We have our water rights. In order to perfect the water right on the surface water treatment plant, we have to actually do that work, get it up and running, and actually start drawing water. There's a process you have to go through. It's like Polk Well 4. We have a water right for that, but you don't have a well there. We're building that well. So we'll go through the process of finishing that well, running water through it, doing the testing, getting buy-off from the state, and then they will perfect that use of that well.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Great. Additional questions? Not, it's an action item.
I will make the motion, but I want you to know that my favorite 2 lines on the first page of this says, fiscal impact, none. I move to adopt resolution 24-1613.
I second.
A motion, a second by Roden. Is there discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Council announcements,
Yes.
please.
On September 5th, there will be a general open meeting of the Independence Downtown Association at 5:30 in Gilgamesh. Great time to come and listen to what's happening in your downtown. On September 21st is the Independence Hop and Heritage Festival, predominantly on C Street, but I'm sure it will encompass much of downtown. And on October 5th is the Ghost Walk, and that starts at 7 o'clock, also downtown.
Great.
I have an announcement.
Please.
I'm sure we all know, we've heard of the tragedy in Monmouth. I know this family hurts my heart that people, that what's happening, and I had Central's class reunion, which of course I graduated, I'm not gonna say how many years ago, but we had a class reunion, and it was brought to my attention in my class reunion that people still feel isolated and alone, and it's all because of COVID. And so I just wanted to remind people that if you are feeling alone, if you are in crisis, you can call 988, and that is the crisis helpline. I would hate to people just not know that resource is available if you are sad or alone or anything is bothering you. Just reach out to other people in our community. We're here for you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anything else? And without objection, we're adjourned.